Episode number 11, Ironman Puerto Rico 70.3 with Tanner Lovelace.
Welcome to the pursuit of the perfect race. My name is Terry Wilson, and with each episode, I bring athletes to you that share their experiences at races in order for you to find your perfect race. We will hear stories from athletes of all ages, abilities, and races of all distances. So regardless of where you fit in, there's something in it for you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let the pursuit begin.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Pursuit to the Perfect Race. Today I have the chance to talk with Tanner Lovelace, who's been doing triathlons for 5 years, and today we're going to be talking about Ironman Puerto Rico 70.3. Being that he lives in North Carolina in the States right now, going down to the race really wasn't the easiest thing, but he's going to talk about all the fun stuff going down to Puerto Rico and his race down there. Welcome to the show, Tanner. Glad to have you on.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. So what made you want to do this race?
Well, I like to find at least one destination race per year, something interesting, has some travel involved, and is an interesting place to visit. And I had seen this race a few years ago. I've had several friends who've done the race, and they've said good things about it. So I wanted to try and do it. And the reason I ended up doing it this year is my wife and I are actually members of a local theater group that does Gilbert and Sullivan shows. And normally we are doing one of our yearly show in March. But this year, because of the way that Easter worked out on the calendar, our show is in April. So my March was free. And I took the opportunity, since I had the free March this year and I didn't have it last year, or I won't have it next year, to go ahead and sign up for this race now. Because if I didn't sign up for it now, it would have been 2 more years before I'd be able to do it at the earliest.
Wow. So how much was this race? Was it about normal for a half iron?
Yeah, it was a normal price for a half iron. I think it was somewhere in the range of 300 to 350.
That's not too bad.
Yeah, for an Ironman race, it's not too bad. And I actually ended up, I signed up for it just as soon as it opened, which turned out to be 1 week before Puerto Rico got hit by Hurricane Irma.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was a big question as to whether or not the race was going to happen at all once that came through, and then Maria came through also. And the island it has been not in the best of shape, but where the race is in San Juan, which is the capital city, is where the recovery is the furthest along. So I believe, from what I gather from the race organizers, they really wanted to have this race so they could essentially prove to the world and to themselves that, yes, they were moving on. They were getting back to the way things were normal. So rather than cancel the race, they went ahead and decided to go ahead and do it.
Wow, that's pretty cool. What was your biggest training days going into the race?
I actually spent most of my training for this race doing a lot of running. Since I had designated this as a destination race, I wasn't really concerned about doing my absolute best on the triathlon. And 2 weeks before this race, I had a half marathon. So I spent most of my training working towards that. I only actually swam 4 times between the North Carolina half iron last year and this race. And the vast majority of my training was on run training, which isn't that bad a thing, because when I did triathlons a couple of years ago, when I got to the run portion, that was every single time was my most disappointing segment. And so I've been working on trying to make my run better. I definitely could have done more swimming and more biking for this race, but it wasn't too bad to focus on the run. And as far as biggest days, not sure about biggest days. I know I had one week where I actually ran 40 miles in an entire week, in addition to doing a bike. And I don't think I did swim that week. And that's actually the longest I've run in a week ever in my entire life.
Wow. And you've done a full iron too, right?
I've done 2 full Ironmans, yes.
Wow. So you felt pretty confident going into the run?
I would have felt pretty confident going into the run if I hadn't messed up the day before and tried to walk back from bike check-in my socks, not realizing that there was black sidewalk between the transition and my condo where I was staying at the Airbnb. And so I ended up burning my feet and getting blisters on them, which didn't really help for the run. But I mean, as far as doing the distance is concerned, I felt fine with that. It's just if I had been smart and not burned my feet the day before, I would have done much better. But I still finished the race. It was kind of painful.
So whenever you got ready to leave to go down to Puerto Rico, the race was on a Sunday. When did you actually leave for the race?
I flew out Friday morning at 7:30 in the morning, and I ended up getting down to San Juan in about 1:30 in the afternoon. I had friends who actually went out down on Thursday, but I was trying to save my vacation time for some stuff for my wife and I to do later in the year. So I only took off the Friday before the weekend and then the Monday afterwards.
Okay. You traveled with your bike, obviously. What kind of bike case do you have?
I have a Shicon case. It's spelled Scicon, so lots of people pronounce it Scicon. According to the manufacturer, it's pronounced Shicon. And what's really nice about this case that I like a lot is that it doesn't require you to remove your handlebars. It has an internal frame in the case. You just take the wheels off, use the quick releases to connect it to the internal frame, and then it's got a bunch of straps that you strap it down into the frame. You take your wheels, you deflate them. It has pockets on either side for it, and then you just zip it up and take it to the baggage check-in for the airplane, and it works really well.
Wow, no issues with baggage handlers abusing it?
No, that seems to work well. The only issues people have seemed to had from talked to friends who had the same bag is with sometimes the TSA opening it and looking through it possibly might disconnect it from the internal frame. But when I dropped mine off, I actually talked to TSA and explained to them about everything, how everything was set up in the bag to make sure that they didn't disconnect anything, and everything worked out really well.
Well, that's good. So you leave on Friday and you get there around 1 o'clock. What do you do when you get there?
Well, first thing was to get to the condo, the Airbnb where I was staying. And then the next thing was to get my bike back together, make sure everything was working fine on it. One thing I did have to do, and I didn't have to take my handlebars off, but I do have to take my aero bar extensions and push them in a bit, because otherwise they stick out too far. And so I had to put those back in place, put my water bottle holder on the aero bars back together, put the wheels back on, attempt to pump up the wheels with a small hand pump since I didn't bring a full pump. That's probably the most difficult part.
Did you travel with any CO2s?
Technically, you're not supposed to travel with CO2s. You're not supposed to at least put them in your luggage. When I actually came back, I used this bag last year also to travel up to Mont Tremblant, and when I came back, I had forgotten to take my CO2s out, and they actually found them when they were looking through my bag before I took off, and they actually said, "Nah, go ahead and put them back in." But the TSA rules, as far as I understand, say you're not supposed to travel with them. So I usually try and take them out before traveling.
Nice. And then just get some on race site.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. They had ones available at the expo that I picked up.
Okay. So you get your bike put together. Do you have any special dinner that you had to go and get groceries for or anything like that?
No, since I wasn't there that long, I just did most of my meals out as a restaurant. Had basically some pasta that night. I did go and check in and get my bib and timing chip and everything on Friday afternoon.
Okay.
Because the check-in was open until 6.
How was that process?
It was very smooth. There wasn't that many people checking in at that particular time. So I sailed right through. It was kind of interesting for this race. They had something different than every other Ironman race I've been to in that they were using a disposable timing strap.
Really?
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever seen it. But they said, yeah, you just put it around your leg the morning of the race. It's waterproof. And when you're done with the race, just cut it off and throw it away if you want. Don't have to have anybody waiting at the finish line to take it off you.
Now, is this the big foam one?
Yes, is the big foam one.
Oh, wow. I've used that one once before whenever I did a relay for Buffalo Springs in 2015. And I felt like it was just so big. And I don't know, it just felt weird.
It did feel a little weird, but when I finished my swim and got the transition, I decided to go ahead and put on compression sleeves, and so I just put the compression sleeve over it. And at that point, the compression sleeve is holding it down, and I didn't notice it for the rest of the race, so it wasn't too bad.
So you get it all checked in. How was the volunteers at check-in?
Well, the volunteers were great. I mean, they were very friendly, big smiles, very helpful. And there was a lot of them too. So they really helped out and pointed me in the right direction and helped me get through fairly quickly.
Was there a language barrier at all?
No, not so much. I mean, I actually do speak Spanish.
Okay.
I used to live in Spain. But my biggest problem is because I haven't used it in over 20 years, is I've forgotten a lot of the vocabulary. But just the general interactions, I can equip myself fairly well.
Okay. So you get all checked in, you go out for dinner that night. Where'd you go?
I actually took a walk down the road. I looked up on Google Maps and saw that there was a bunch of restaurants nearby, and so I decided to go walk and see what was open. There were quite a few restaurants I noticed that were not open, and I wasn't sure. I'm assuming a decent amount of them were closed since the hurricane. I later heard from a friend who had talked to one of the local shops saying that they had only gotten their insurance check for the hurricane damage the week before. I assume that at least at some of the shops that were closed didn't have the capital to reopen until they got their insurance money.
Wow.
So, but I found a little, it was, I guess it was pizza place is what the name said, but they had pasta in there. And so I got some pasta and had a nice little quiet dinner, and then went back to the condo and went to bed early because I knew the most important night of sleep is the night before the race. Right. Because the night before the race, you've always got nerves and it's hard to get to sleep and hard to get rested and stuff. But if you can get a really good night's sleep the night before that, it's not too bad. So I really tried hard to go to bed early, sleep in a bit, and I got about 9 hours of sleep that night. So that helped.
Good. So the next day, did you do any type of workout?
Yes, actually, the first thing I did that morning, since my condo was right next to the swim start, first thing I did was I went out and I did a swim in the lagoon where the swim was. And there were tons of athletes out there also swimming. There's lots of people to swim with. So I spent about a half an hour swimming in the lagoon and just reacquainting myself with open water swimming. Not something that you do very often in the winter in North Carolina.
Right. Now, this was a wetsuit legal swim, right?
It was not a wetsuit legal swim.
It was not.
No, the water was fairly warm. I want to say it was probably upper 70s, low 80s.
Okay. So the picture I saw was actually a speed suit you were wearing then.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
When Trisports went out of business last year, they had some really, really, really good deals. And I picked up a speed suit for like 30% of the original cost.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if it helped me or not, but it felt like it did. So I guess maybe partially it's mental. It gave me a little confidence there.
Right.
but I felt perfectly fine swimming, no problems at all. And so that made me feel good about the swim tomorrow or the next day, especially after not having swam hardly at all since October.
Right. How was this water quality?
The water was fine. It was very clear. I didn't actually see any, but I know people who said that they had seen manatees in the lagoon nearby. So, but the water was very clear. It's salt water, so it's very buoyant. And now it felt perfectly fine. And it's a protected lagoon, so there was basically no waves or anything like that. The swim itself for the race goes through the protected lagoon and then it continues under a bridge into an area that is slightly open to the Atlantic. And once you pass under the bridge, there's a bit more current and waves there. But when I was doing it the day before, I was just in the protected lagoon and it was fine. So that felt really good. And then after the swim, I went out and decided to make sure my bike was working. So I was first going to walk it over to Transition, which was about a 15-20 minute walk away, to find a full-size pump, because with the hand pump I was traveling with, I could only get it up to about 60 psi, and I really wanted my tires up to 100 psi. As I was walking, I found a group of cyclists, and one of them loaned me a full-size pump to pump things up. So I was able to pump it up, went through a bike ride through the old San Juan, which is actually where the run happens. So I essentially biked part of the run course, did about a half an hour bike there, then went and dropped my bike off, went to an athlete briefing.
The Transition, this is all on grass?
The Transition, yes, this year was on grass. Previous years, I was told it was actually in a baseball stadium, which was right next to where Transition was this year. For whatever reason, they moved Transition this year to just outside the stadium onto a little patch of grass, which is right next to where the big tent was for the expo, and right next to where the finish line was. It was on an overlook next to the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay. So now whenever you get all that stuff done, you get your workout in, what do you do for the rest of the day?
I walked back to the condo, tried to walk back in socks, carrying my bike shoes. When I felt my feet started burning, I put my bike shoes on and walked back there. And I realized I'd done something to my feet, so I wanted to make sure that I could still run the next day. And so I ended up putting on my running shoes and going out for a little bit of run. And I actually stopped halfway during the run at a Walgreens pharmacy and got some, they were called callus cushions that you put on around blisters on your feet, and put them on my feet during the middle of the run, and ran just a couple of miles to make sure that I could still run, because I wasn't sure how bad I had messed up my feet. So did that. Once that was done, I met up with some friends of mine who were also there for the race, and went out for dinner, and then came back and tried to go to bed early.
Nice. So did you have like a certain dinner that you were aiming for that night?
No, just something that would give me enough nutrition to feel satiated but not overly full. So we went to a Puerto Rican / Spanish place, and I actually had a traditional Puerto Rican style appetizer called mofongo, which is mashed plantains.
Wow,
and that was pretty good. It was pretty good. It had a sort of a garlic sauce to go with it, and it was really good.
Were you able to drink the water there, or did you trust the water there?
Oh yeah, the water was fine. No problems at all there.
Wow. So what time do you get up on race morning?
Well, it depends on what the race schedule is. The race schedule for this race was that Transition opened at 4:30 a.m. and then closed at 6 a.m. so we would have time to walk over to the swim start. The swim started, I think the first swim wave started at 6:52 a.m. Right after they had the national anthems at 6:40. Now, I'm not a morning person, so I prefer not to wake up very, very early. So I woke up somewhere between 4:30 and 5 a.m. Um, with the idea that I wanted to be headed over there towards transition by 5 a.m. So I woke up, I guess it was about 4:40 or so. I got my bottles out of the fridge, which I use infinite on my bike. So I mixed all that up the night before, and I packed everything in my backpack, my Ironman Chattanooga backpack, to carry everything over. And so by 5 a.m., I was out of the condo and walking over to transition. Once I got there, I got everything set up. There's a little confusion about people next to me, which way their bikes should be pointed. We got all that settled out. I got everything set up, and got all my sunscreen on, and then headed over to the swim.
Now, did it really matter about the bike of which way it was pointing?
Well, mainly only for the amount of space that you have to put things in. Because where you're putting in your stuff next to your bike, it's usually underneath the back wheel of the other bikes. So if you have 2 or 3 bikes all pointed the same way, there's much less space for you to put your stuff.
Gotcha. So were you mounting your bike by the seat post, or did you mount it by the handlebars?
I always mount mine by the seat post.
Okay.
And everyone there seemed to be doing the same thing. But the 2 people on either side of me didn't seem to realize which way to put their bikes. And I got them to put them correctly before the race. But when I got back after the bike, they had both of them put them the wrong way. And it was fairly difficult to get it in because it's not really wide enough to have 3 handlebars all in a row.
Oh, man. So now you get to the swim. How was the last 10 minutes before you started the swim? How was that?
The last 10 minutes, I mean, just before I start a race, I actually feel fairly calm because at that point, anything I would be worrying about beforehand, I can't do anything about. So there's no point in worrying about it. So the 10 minutes before the race are the most calm I ever am. And so you're in line with everybody else. You're waiting for your wave to move forward, and all you do is just sort of relax, take a few deep breaths, and try to visualize what the race is going to be like.
Nice. So was this a mass start in the water, or was this everybody just goes at one at a time? How was that?
It was a wave start. We had, I think I was in wave 7, which was the right smack dab in the middle of all the waves. And what happened was we all walked into the water. So we were able to get into the water and for a few minutes early, do a little bit of warm up there, get used to the water temperature. And then they had 2 buoys that we lined up behind. And then they're like, 30 seconds to go, 10 seconds, 5 seconds, go. And my entire wave, which was the men's 45 to 49, headed out.
Now, with the swim course, was any of this facing east?
So, yes. Well, sort of slightly southeast. The swim course is designed so that it's in Condado Lagoon, and you swim from the very front of the lagoon all the way down to the end. You sort of loop around and back to the front again, go under a bridge, and then across a little segment to the swim exit. And so that first section there, which is probably about, I want to say 700 or 800 meters, is sort of into the sun. So that was kind of interesting from sighting standpoint, but it wasn't too bad. It was slightly off from the sun, so it wasn't like looking in it all the time.
Did you use tinted goggles for this, I would assume?
The goggles I have are actually, well, they're supposed to be transitions. So they're supposed to tint more when you have more sun. I'm not sure how well it works, but I didn't seem to have too much problem. The few times when I was breathing and I would have been looking straight at the sun, I actually closed my eyes for that, so rather than look into the sun. And the times I couldn't see the sighting buoys, I could see all the people around me, and so I sort of aimed myself in the direction they were going until I could see a sighting buoy again.
Nice. It's just they're all going somewhere, so I'll just follow them.
Right, because I figured I would see a buoy at some point, and I did. So the swim actually, I thought it went pretty well. I was looking at my splits afterwards, and like it gives me splits every 500 yards, and first 500 yards I was fairly fast for me, which I'm not necessarily a fast swimmer, but decent speed for me. The next two 500-yard segments, I was sort of cruising along, and then from like 1,500 yards to 2,000 yards, that one was about 10 or 12 seconds slower than the rest. And thinking back, I had a few times where I was trying to avoid running into people. So just sort of maneuvering around, trying to make sure that I didn't get caught in anything or run into anybody. And then the last segment, once I crossed the bridge and went under the bridge into the area where they had a bunch of waves and sort of a cross current. At that point, I really wanted to make it to the finish, and I was really going for it. And I was thinking I was actually fairly slower in that section because of all the current and stuff. But when I looked at my splits afterwards, I was actually much faster than the previous section of the swim. So by like 8 seconds per 100 yards or so.
Nice. So you get to the swim out. How was from swim out to transition? How was that?
So from swim out to transition, there is about at least a half a mile run.
Really?
Yes, it was a ways. So I had been warned about this before, and I had actually brought an old pair of sandals to leave at the swim exit so that I could put them on and wear them from the swim exit to transition. So
now,
first thing I did.
So now, is this the same pair of sandals you wore on race morning?
Yes, they were.
Okay, so you just, before you got in, you put them off to the side, then you came back?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can use the same pair. That's all I was basically asking.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could have had a separate pair and left one pair in with my morning clothes bag, but I actually decided not to do anything with morning clothes because I had arranged everything so I didn't need it. So yeah, I left a pair of sandals there, and the swim exit to the swim start was about a 5-10 minute walk. So that wasn't too bad. But I got out of the swim, grabbed my sandals, put them on, and then took off towards transition. And what I actually spent a lot of time in transition trying to, well, first of all, I had to put on compression sleeves.
Right.
And then I was putting on some cushions around my blisters. And the main problem there was my feet were still wet, and the adhesive on the cushions wouldn't stay on my feet. So I was essentially holding them in place and pulling the sock over them and hoping it would stay.
Oh, wow.
So my transition one was a lot longer than I think it would normally be. But I figured it was worth it if I could protect my feet a bit.
Right. So you get to your bike. Now, was there any type of stairs or anything you had to go up on that half-mile run from the swim out?
No, thankfully, no. It was very flat.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, there was one thing I did on the way from the swim exit to transition. Since it went by a beach, there was some beach showers there, and so I paused very briefly to hit the button to have one of the beach showers come on, and I tried to get as much salt off of me as I could.
Nice.
Because I knew it was going to get hot during the day, and if I still had all the salt water on me, that was just going to make things all that more itchy.
Right.
So I think I did a fairly good job.
Well, good. Now then, so you get to your bike, you get everything set up on it, and you get ready to go. Do you use any type of chamois cream?
I do. I actually, I use Ruby's Lube,
Nice.
which I started using since I became a member of Big Sexy Racing. I didn't know about them beforehand, but I like them quite a bit now. So I had I actually had done a bit before the swim. I didn't put any more before the bike, which maybe I should have, because I had a few problems on the bike. But then I did some more for the run, and I was perfectly fine during the run.
Nice. So you get out. You didn't say how much PSI you put in your bike wheels. Was it 100, you said?
100 PSI, yeah.
Okay.
And I had done that the day before, and just trusted that my wheels would be fine that day of. I actually had felt them, and they still felt fairly hard on the morning of, so I didn't bother pumping them up again that morning.
Nice. So did you use a race computer for this race?
Yes. Well, I use a Garmin Fenix 5 for the entire race. But for the bike itself, since I want to be able to see my power numbers, because I race by power,
Okay.
I have an Edge 1000 on my bike.
I have the same computer. I like mine.
So it's a nice one. I used to have the 520, but I ended up trading that with someone last year for the 1000, and I really like the bigger display.
It is. It's so much nicer. Now, so are you going by normalized power, 3-second average power, 5-second average? What are you going by?
I actually have my computer display percentage FTP.
Okay.
So, and I was aiming for about 80% of my FTP.
Okay.
The first part of the bike course they describe it as a lollipop.
Okay.
You have a one segment that goes out, and then you get to a point where is like the bottom of the lollipop, and then you do 2 loops of the lollipop, and then back to transition. So it's about 10.5 miles out to where the loop happens, and then you do 2 loops and then come back, and once you get to the turn where you turn around for the loop start the second loop, it's 10.5 miles back. So
okay, now so this is similar to Chattanooga in that aspect, then.
Similar to the Chattanooga full, yes.
Right, because you go down, you do 2 loops, and you come back.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Just different distances.
Right, except it's actually the loop on Puerto Rico is actually an out and back.
Okay.
So unlike Chattanooga, where it is an actual loop, this one is just you go out to a certain point, you come back to a certain point, you go back out to the original point, and then you come all the way back in.
Okay. How were the road conditions?
They could be better.
So it's a little rough?
There were sections of it, yes, that were definitely rough. There were sections that had been definitely repaired, but there were still a decent amount of potholes and a decent amount of rough road. I saw lots of cyclists on the side of the road with flat tires.
Really?
Yeah, from which I assume at least some of them were from hitting potholes. I know a friend of mine had mentioned he had passed by one place where every single time he passed by it, he saw like half a dozen inner tubes that people had changed, and there was always a cyclist there changing a tube.
Wow.
So
where was that portion at? Do you know?
It was probably just a few miles from the end turnaround. I actually had one point where I hit a pothole, but I saw it at the last instant and sort of tried to um, almost sort of bunny hop over it. My past, I started out as a mountain biker, and you don't really do that with a tri bike. Just sort of, but just sort of pull up on the front so that you're not putting your full weight where it hits the pothole. And very luckily, I did not have a flat tire.
Wow.
Although looking at my tires after the race, I see a place where it's definitely worn and almost cut, but it didn't go all the way through. So I just ordered new tires for my next race.
Nice. So what wheels were you using for the race?
So I have a set of Ore carbon wheels.
Yeah.
That I picked up at the Raleigh 70.3 Expo last year. I actually run basically 60 millimeter depth tires on both the front and back. I used to have a set of flows that were 60 in front and 80 in back, and I spent way too much time dealing with extensions for the tubes to be able to pump them up with the 80. That when I got these wheels, I decided I'm just going to go with 60 because the difference between 60 and 80 in the back is only a few seconds, and that way I can just buy a tubes with an 80 millimeter length extension, and that way I don't have to deal with adding these valve extenders.
Right. That's the reason I love the Reynolds Strikes that I have. I can just put in an 80, call it good. With anything deeper, I mean, I would love to rock a disc, but with the disc, you can still just use a 40 and still have access to it. But I love my Strikes because it just puts an 80 in there, call it good.
Yeah, I mean, I used to have a wheel cover for my previous wheels, and I still need to perhaps get one for these wheels. But again, that would just it would be the same length valve extender. So
nice. So it's got pretty rough roads. Now, do you think 100 psi might have been a little too much?
Maybe I think I felt it was actually not too bad. I definitely would not have wanted to go above 100. I think if since I had 23 millimeter width tires, if I had a wider tire, I probably would have gone for a lower psi. But at 23 millimeters, I felt that the 100 was probably good.
Okay. So you give it the bike. How did your nutrition go?
My nutrition went fine. I used Infinite on the bike. So I have a bottle in front. I actually have an X-Lab torpedo in front. And so I have the straw and I drink from that every 15 to 20 minutes, try and finish one bottle every single hour. I carried 2 extra bottles with me that every single time I emptied out the X-Lab torpedo, I would pull out a bottle and fill it back up because it has the quick
quick fill
that you can quick fill, yeah. And I that was fine. I did carry some shot blocks on the bike also, just in case something went wrong with my nutrition, but I didn't have any need to use them. So I did Infinite throughout the entire bike.
So you finished in right over 3 hours. Were you aiming for a certain calories every hour?
Yeah, well, I mean, so I for the race, I actually I use the Infinite Go Far solution, and I actually get the single serving packs. So I don't remember how many calories is in each one of those, but I was aiming for one of those per hour, which I think is about, I want to say it's about 300, maybe plus or minus 50 calories or so per hour. So, and I use the Go Far, the orange, because it has protein, and protein, when you're on the bike, tends to make it so you're less hungry. So it gives you a sort of feeling full, like you're not starving.
Well, that's good. So you get
definitely.
So you get to the end of the bike ride. How were the last few miles of the bike ride?
They were pretty good. You're coming back into town. That's the first few miles and the last few miles are actually the most up and down because you have to go up over freeway bridges. So there's a little bit of climbing there, but it wasn't too bad. But at that time, things had started to heat up a bit. The wind had picked up a little more, so the second half of the bike was definitely slower than the first, primarily because of the wind. But I finished the bike, felt fine. Got off the bike, headed to transition, and then spent a few more minutes readjusting the cushions around the blisters on my feet before heading out on the run. My feet had been bothering me a bit on the bike because of the blisters, so I wanted to spend a little extra time trying to get the cushions around the blisters in transition so that it would hopefully not bother me as much on the run. It still bothered me on the run, but I think if I hadn't done that, it would have been a lot worse. So it went okay. My general feeling in transition is not to try and rush things, but to try and do things smoothly. So have an idea of what you want to do, and then just go do one thing after the other. I guess there's the old saying, slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Exactly.
List of things I want to do, just check them off one by one. So take care of my feet, put on sunscreen because I tend to burn fairly easily. Then I had everything packed in my Camelback. I run with a Camelback marathoner, and had my bib, the bib number in there, and my hat. And so just put that on, grabbed the hat and bib number, and ran out.
Nice. So overall, the bike course wasn't that hilly, right?
No, it's mostly flat. It's just the overpasses at the beginning and end.
Okay. Just lots of potholes, pretty rough roads.
You could tell that they had filled a lot of potholes, but there was still enough there. The vast majority of them were marked. So
that's good.
It wasn't too bad.
Whenever you get on the run, how did the first few miles go on the run?
The first few miles were getting used to how my feet were feeling. But they went pretty well. I mean, it was fairly hot at that point, but once we got out of the transition area was kind of in a section of area that was kind of protected from the wind. So we weren't getting much of a breeze there, and the pavement there was making things fairly hot. But once we climbed out of that, which wasn't a very big climb, but it was a little bit of a climb to begin with, and then we got a really, really nice breeze, and that breeze really helped make things cool. But it was still in the mid 80s. So what I ended up doing was at every single aid station, I would grab a handful of ice and then tuck it in my tri-suit.
Nice.
And let it melt until the next aid station. I did that for every single aid station. One thing I learned when I did Ironman Chattanooga 2 years ago, that was back when, if you remember Ironman Chattanooga, we got up to 98 degrees that day.
Right. That was the hot year.
That was the hot year, yeah.
So what was that 40% DNF that race?
DNF and DNS did not finish and did not start.
Wow.
So, but on that race, when I was on the run, I had taken a cup of ice and was throwing it down my back at every single aid station until the sun set. And when the sun set, I decided I didn't need to do that anymore. Well, that was a big mistake because around mile 20 of the run, I overheated and got really dizzy and spent 20 minutes at the aid station with pouring ice over me until I cooled down enough to finish the run. So the lesson I took from that day was, if I start something like that with ice, even if I feel okay, just keep doing it for the rest of the run. So when I started getting ice at every single aid station at Puerto Rico, I was like, okay, even if I feel better later on, I'm just going to keep doing this for every single aid station.
Nice. So now then, are you using the on course nutrition at this point, or did you keep doing the infinite?
Neither, actually. I used to use Infinite on the run too, but late last year I switched from using Infinite to just using goo packets.
Okay.
And that actually works better for me than Infinite on the run for whatever reason. So what I would do is I set it up so that I was carrying enough goo so that I could have one packet every 15 minutes. And I arranged them with different flavors for every time I would do it. And I specifically arranged it so that every half an hour, so like, at 30 minutes and 1 hour, 1:30 and 2, I would eat a goo packet that was a salted goo. So I had
what is it? The caramel, salted caramel,
salted caramel, and salted watermelon.
Nice. So you're doing that for nutrition on the run. Did they have Red Bull at mile 8?
I don't remember them having Red Bull at all. They had Pepsi on the run. They had Pepsi and then Gatorade, water. I did a couple times grab an orange slice.
Okay.
I had one time where actually I got some of the orange pulp down the wrong pipe and decided I'll wait till the finish to get some more oranges.
Right.
The other thing I did was I had just a couple of times during the run where I started to feel like I had overhydrated. I got a little too much water, and every single time that happened, I would pull out my tube of base salt and take a couple things of base salt, and then that actually quieted down that, and I felt fine. And after that,
okay. Did anything on the run stand out?
Well, let's see. The run is through Old San Juan, so it's a very scenic route. And so you run down to Old San Juan, passing 2 different castles, and then you actually run around one and then down on the base of it, right next to the water. And from what I understand, in previous years, they would actually have you run a very long way out on that little portion right next to the water at the base of the wall of the castle. But this year, part of it was damaged from the hurricane. So they had us run out not as far, come back, and then to make up the distance, we actually ran up to the front of the castle, which is on this area where you can actually look out and you can see the coast on either side. And there's a big, huge lawn where people fly kites. So there was a big, huge breeze at that point, which really helped in cooling down.
Wow. Sounds pretty.
It was very pretty. And we did it twice because it's a 2-loop course. There was 2 different places actually where we have a big, huge hill, but it's just it's not very long. It's maybe about a block or 2 climbing up this hill. And so I ended up walking that because I didn't want to try running up and burning too many matches and burning myself out before I finished the run.
How big of a hill was it?
It was probably 200 to 300 feet up.
Wow. Now, was this a mile, what did you say, 4 and 9?
No, I want to say it was at mile like 2, and then we actually go down to go to that section around the castle. And so coming back up, it actually wasn't nearly as steep as it was as the first part, but it was about the same distance, but spread over. I guess the when you're going out, it's maybe a couple hundred feet up in the space of about 2 blocks, but when you're coming back, it's about the same distance spread over a third of a mile. So not nearly as bad of a slope.
Well, that's good. So did you have any cramps on the run this time?
No, didn't have any cramps at all.
Well, that's good.
That's very good. Yes, absolutely.
Now, did you get sunburned at all? Did you use enough sunscreen?
I did not get sunburned. I did notice afterwards I had a little bit of sun on my legs, but I wouldn't call it burnt. It was just sort of slightly darker, and when you press your fingers on it, you can tell that it's you got some sun, but I didn't feel burnt at all. No.
Okay, well, that's good.
So yeah, I had friends who I had one friend who did get very burned, and I asked her about that, and she said she had put sunscreen on 4 times during the race, and she still got burned.
Wow.
Yeah, so I guess was just lucky.
Well, I've found that it's so much easier for me to wear a sleeved kit for races now, because then I don't have to worry about the sun on most of my arms, and
Yeah,
it's so much easier.
I definitely agree. I started wearing sleeved kits exclusively last year, just for that particular reason, because I had been burned the year before behind my shoulders multiple times. And so with the sleeved kit, I don't have to worry about the back of my shoulders.
Oh,
They're
good.
covered.
So the last 800 yards of the run course, how was that?
Well, okay, so we get to where the loop turnaround is, and so I go off towards the finish line, and there's a little pedestrian overpass you have to go up, and I wasn't cramping, but I was sore at this point, and so I was going to walk up that, but about 2/3 of the way up, I see the finisher picks photographer, and I can't be walking when the photographer is there taking my picture. So I'm like, okay, run, sort of smile, ask him, have you taken it yet? Have you taken it yet? And at which point he's like, oh, I'll take another one. So I get past the photographer, and I'm about 2/3 of the way up this overpass. I'm like, okay, I'll walk up to the top now. And then you run past transition. You run around the tent where the expo is, and then the finish line is there on the grass next to the Atlantic Ocean. And that was, it was kind of fun.
Nice. So you finished. What was your recovery plan like?
I didn't really have one, actually. I ended up a friend of mine and was at the finish line there waiting for his girlfriend and taking pictures. He took pictures of me, and he was waiting for his girlfriend. And we talked a little bit, and I actually sat down briefly at the finish line just to catch my breath for a couple of minutes and drink a bottle of water. And then I got up and went looking for the food. I always like to have a pizza or a slice of pizza or something after the race, and had a slice of pizza and ended up in the expo tent where I ate, and I laid down a little bit to just sort of relax, try and get my energy back, and ended up spending I think about a couple hours there eating and resting until the award ceremony.
So what is one thing that you'd like to pass on that you learned from this race?
Well, let's say the most important thing was don't try and walk barefoot the day before the race. But also I'd like to say that I just really loved the race down there, and everyone in Puerto Rico was so friendly. And if you have a chance to do this race, definitely go do it. They announced that it is going to happen next year, which there was a kind of a question about that, because the number of people that raced this year was less than half of what raced it the year before.
Wow.
I think I heard this year we had about 900 athletes, whereas the previous year they had 2,000. Yeah,
so it
was
wasn't
a big
that
difference.
much of a field on the race course.
No, well, unlucky for me, my age group was actually the biggest, but even then, there was only like almost 80 people in my age group.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. It is kind of crazy that it was that small, but they did announce that the race is going to happen next year. So hopefully there'll be more people there next year. They'll be further along in recovery, and the race can just keep growing again from there. I highly recommend doing it.
Good. So what else is on your schedule for the rest of the year?
So I am scheduled to do 2 more half irons. I'm going to do the Chattanooga 70.3. This will be my 3rd year in a row doing it. And that's the one I'm really going for time for. My PR at Chattanooga is 6 hours, 6 minutes. So I'm definitely going for sub 6 there. And then later in the season, I'm doing the Augusta 70.3. That's a race I've been wanting to do for a couple of years. I've had friends do it, and the timing has finally worked out for me to be able to go.
So you'd rather go to Augusta than Chattanooga full?
Well, actually, I'm not. I'm taking a few years off from doing full irons. The amount of time it takes to get ready for a full iron is just crazy. It's a lot of training, and my son is in high school right now. So I just made the decision last year that I was going to hold off and not do any more full Ironmans until he went to college. He's a junior this year, so I'm targeting my next full iron in the year 2020.
So what's your definition of a perfect race?
Well, I would definitely say Puerto Rico 70.3 wasn't it, at least as far as race execution is concerned. As far as race location and setting for the race, I think it's a beautiful location. But if I had to say, my definition of a perfect race would be one where everything comes together. And I actually had that at the North Carolina half iron last year. I had just a perfect swim. I had great transition to bike. I had a perfect bike with no wind at all. And North Carolina, you often have problems with a headwind, which gives you a little bit of a tailwind, but it's usually much more of a problem than it is a help. So we had no wind at all. And then I got out on the run, and I managed to do normally problem I have on the run is I take off too fast to begin with, and I use up too much energy. So at the end of the race, I'm all burnt out and I get really slow. But for that race, I managed to pace myself perfectly and ended up with my best swim split ever, my best bike split ever, and my best run split ever. And I ended up breaking my personal record by almost 20 minutes.
Nice. So you're going to be doing that again at Chattanooga 70.3 this year, right?
Let's hope. I'm going to give it my best shot.
Well, good. Now, if people want to follow you, do you have an Instagram where athletes can follow you? Definitely.
I am Club Juggler, ClubJuggler on Instagram.
Okay.
And I try and post interesting photos about my training there, so that people are welcome to follow me that way.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Tanner, it's been great hearing about your race at Ironman Puerto Rico 70.3. I look forward to seeing you at Chattanooga 70.3, tracking you at Augusta later this year. I wish you the best, and I just want to thank you for your time today, and thank you for sharing your information about your race. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Great. Well, look forward to following you in the future, and the best of luck. Thank you. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. If you were able to learn something from today's episode, take a minute to leave us a review over on iTunes or share it with a friend. This will help us share it with even more athletes. If you'd like to learn more about who I am and what I do, check out my website at CoachTerryWilson.com, where you can find the rest of the episodes of this podcast as well. Until next time, continue the pursuit.